Praise to you, Christ, King of eternal glory. Praise to you, Christ, King of eternal glory. Now it is the Lord who speaks. Come back to me with all your heart, for I am all tenderness and compassion.
Praise to you, Christ, King of eternal glory. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At daybreak, he appeared in the temple again, and as all the people came to him, he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman along who had been caught committing adultery, and making her stand there in full view of everybody, they said to Jesus, "Master, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery, and Moses has ordered us in the law to condemn women like this to death by stoning. What have you to say?" They asked him this as a test, looking for something to use against him. But Jesus bent down and started writing on the ground with his finger. As they persisted with their question, he looked up and said, "If there is one of you who has not sinned, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Then he bent down and wrote on the ground again. When they heard this, they went away one by one, beginning with the eldest, until Jesus was left alone with the woman, who remained standing there. He looked up and said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she replied. "Neither do I condemn you," said Jesus. "Go away and don't sin anymore." The Gospel of the Lord. The season of Lent is a time where we're invited to see with new eyes, to see what God has on offer for us. So how's your Lent going? How has your life changed? You've only got a week to go. But it's not too late. Today, as we gather together to celebrate our Mass, I'm reminded of a film that I saw recently called Sorry We Missed You. It's a great film. It's worth seeing. It's a tearjerker, so let me warn you. And it's kind of very sad. It's got a really sad ending. I don't want to do a spoiler alert, so I'll not tell you how it ends. But basically, it's about a family. But the kind of main character is the husband and the wife. And the husband has to take a job as a delivery driver. And the wife works in social care. And the film basically charts their life and the struggles that they both have. You know, he's on a 0-hour contract. The person who's employing him, his only concern is profit. He doesn't care about the drivers. You know, and heaps on more and more and more work, more and more demands that they have to make for a pittance. And his wife works in social care, and the social care people are cutting their budget, and so they're demanding more and more and more of her, and she's finding it more and more difficult to deal with her clients in a way that would show compassion and love, a compassion and love that she has for the people that she cares for. But the system really doesn't care about that. And kind of one of the things that really struck me about the film is the way that people treated the delivery man at the door. They saw him as the delivery man, the driver, the method by which their parcels get delivered. They didn't see the man who has a name, who has a family, who has a story of his life. They weren't interested in that. They just wanted their parcel delivered to the door on time. You know, it was a real wake-up call for me. Ever since I watched that film, I've treated the delivery people a bit differently. They kind of hate it because they're running by the clock, but I take time to say, how are you? Are you having a good day? Please drive safely. And whilst they run away from you, they do have a smile on their face because they realize that somebody sees the human being in them. Perhaps, if nothing else for Lent, for the remainder of Lent, when your Amazon delivery or any other delivery, because there are alternative deliveries, gets taken to your door today, just treat the person slightly different. And the reason that I'm saying to you is we've kind of got the same syndrome at Mass today. You know, we have this story of the woman caught committing adultery. That's what she's known as. The woman caught in the very act of committing adultery. You know, what's going on here? Everywhere else in the gospel, when Jesus encounters someone who is in sin, we get to know their names. They're never defined by their sin. Jesus encounters them by their name. But here we've got this woman caught in the very act of committing adultery. Imagine that's how we were known, that's how we were defined. Can you imagine being introduced? Here is the boy that stole 20 pounds from his mother's purse and watched her weep as she discovered it. Or let me introduce you to the man who's never held down a job because he's got anger issues. Or let me introduce you to the woman caught in the very act of committing adultery. Would you like to be defined by your worst moment? Would you like to be introduced by your worst moment? Absolutely not. Because all of us have worst moments. But all of us know that that's not what defines us. There's more to us than our worst moments. And conversely, there's more to us than our best moments. We're much more complicated than that. But all of us has a deep down desire to be known by who we are, to be named as a person. And so we've got this woman caught in the very act of committing adultery. What's going on here? You know, and we want to explore this a wee bit further in the Gospel of John, because we're reading John's Gospel. This is the year of Luke, but today we've taken a sidestep out of Luke's Gospel, and we're hearing about this story from John's Gospel. Now, you might think it really doesn't matter which Gospel we read this story about, because it's basically the same story. Well, that's not true, because how the author deals with the story is different. You know, when we look at the other Gospels, and particularly Luke, when we hear of this story, he deals with it completely differently. You know, in Luke we have themes that kind of make sense to us. The way the woman is treated. You know, Luke's a champion of sinners, of women, of underdogs. You know, the woman ticks all three boxes. You know, Luke's a champion of those kind of people. You know, if we approach this gospel, we might want to talk about the evils of adultery and the sins against chastity. Although that would be a stretch, demonstrating the fact that we hear of the great mercy of Jesus. Or perhaps we could approach it in an issue of social justice. You know, the woman is brought before to be judged on the act of committing adultery. And she's on her own in an act that demands that there is at least another party involved. It doesn't seem just. Or perhaps we can look at the legalism of the scribes and the Pharisees. There's no compassion with someone who's had their worst moment. And we see Jesus, perhaps we can focus in on Jesus writing on the ground. And there's all sorts of writings and homilies about what Jesus wrote on the ground. We have no idea what he wrote on the ground because the Gospels don't tell us. You know, but what we do know is that that act of doodling on the ground is enough to make the crowd start to think of, can I throw the first stone? But when we look at John's Gospel, we see these ideas and these themes don't fit. You know, in fact, this story about the woman caught committing adultery that fits uncomfortably into this section of John's Gospel. There are two parts just before this Gospel and just after this Gospel that actually seem to fit together quite well. There's a question about Jesus' authority, and then Jesus goes on to say, I am the light of the world. And they fit quite well. You know, if we miss out this story about the woman caught committing the act of adultery, it would flow. And in fact, this story about the woman caught in the act of committing adultery, I wish she had a name, because that's a big, long thing to go through every time, but it breaks the flow. And John does that deliberately. Because what's at issue here is much more than the woman. In John's Gospel, you never find John talking about miracles. He talks about signs. And what we discover in John's Gospel is he's in constant conflict about his authority. And so whenever we hear encounters of Jesus healing or teaching or turning water into wine, walking on the water, raising Lazarus from the dead, the point is not to demonstrate the compassion of Christ. The point is these demonstrate that Jesus is who he says he is. That's the whole point. And so today's gospel isn't about the woman at all. You know, the Renaissance artists really got this right when they painted this scene. I think we can see an image of that, where you can see the two main characters are Jesus and one of the Pharisees or the scribes. The woman's an irrelevance. She's not really part of the conversation. She stands outside of the main event. And in John's Gospel, the woman is just an object being used by the scribes and the Pharisees to test Jesus. They say that in the Gospel. You know, the woman is actually unimportant here. You know, in another place, Jesus uses a coin to demonstrate his authority. When he says, you know, whose face is this on the coin? It's Caesar's. Who do we pay taxes to? You know, and Jesus says, well, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, but give to God what's God. The coin is just the tool that Jesus uses to teach. The woman is just a tool that the scribes and the Pharisees use to test Jesus. They are not interested in the woman. This is not about the woman. This is about who has authority to act here. Who has the power to act? And there's a constant battle between Jesus and the scribes and the Pharisees about who speaks with authority. And so this gospel is not there to demonstrate anything about the woman, but it is there to demonstrate that when Jesus speaks, he speaks with authority. That he is who he says he is. That's the whole point of the gospel. And they enter into this battle, the scribes and the Pharisees and Jesus, and Jesus comes out as the victor. You know, and we have this whole notion of the scribes and the Pharisees, you know, believe in the law of Moses. And Jesus believes in the law of Moses. What Jesus doesn't believe is the self-appointed interpreters of that law. That there is only one authentic interpreter of that law, and that's God himself. Because after all, the law of Moses is God's gift to his people. But what the battle is here between Jesus and the authorities is who gets to interpret that law. And Jesus really challenges those who have become the judges of the law because they are unjust judges. When Jesus says, let the person who is without sin cast the first stone, he is undermining their authority. How can I make a decision about your life when my life's a mess? How can I stand here and judge you when I've had darkest moments myself? That's what's at the root of this. And so the only one who can really speak with authority is God. And God may choose to do with adulterers now or later to determine their culpability. It's something that sinful humanity cannot decide. And in effect, Jesus doesn't question the law of Moses, but questions their ability to interpret that law. You know, there's something really interesting in the gospel today, and you won't pick it up, but if you look at the other gospels, it's slightly different. When Jesus is alone with the woman, he doesn't forgive her. He doesn't pronounce her innocent. He just refuses to condemn her. And he advises her in future to stay out of trouble. You know, I think when we heard that gospel today, you probably heard that Jesus forgave her. He didn't. He just said, has no one condemned you? Neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more. That's different from your sins are forgiven. You know, Jesus has won the round between the scribes and the Pharisees. But it's on the principle of judgment, not on divine mercy, that the battle was waged. He wasn't battling with the woman. He was battling with the scribes and the Pharisees. The prophet Isaiah today in our first reading talks about a new time, that God has ushered in a new time. And he's saying part of the difficulty about the new time is that we tend to look back. You know, the people look back and say, what wonderful things that God has done for us. You know, he even parted the Red Sea and took us out of slavery of Egypt into the new promised land. God has done all this for us. And Isaiah saying, yeah, and he's still working. He's still working among you. But you're so blind to the past. You're so caught up in the past that you can't recognize God here and now. And that's the problem with the scribes and the Pharisees. They are so closed in on their interpretation of what's right that they can't see God revealing himself in the person of Jesus, ushering in a new age. And it's a warning to us. You know, the temptation for us is to say, well, God did all these things in the past. You know, God did all these things when Jesus was alive and walking on earth. God is doing these things today. But do we have open hearts or closed hearts? Do we want to recognize that God is inviting us to change? He's inviting us to allow him into our lives. That he is working miracles today among us. Or have we stopped seeing clearly? Have we become so caught up in our judgments, in our notions of what's right and what's wrong, that we can't see the unfolding of God's plan anymore? We are being reminded today that the only just judge is the one who comes to us who is without sin. All of us, our judgments are tainted. And so we should be really wary about judging one another, because we do it without seeing clearly. You know, there's only one who can judge, and that is Christ. And later on next week, in Good Friday, we're going to hear the judgment of Christ, that he takes his place on the judgment throne, which is the cross. And that at the end of our days, all of us will have to stand before the judgment throne of Christ. And I think what today's gospel advises us to do is to make sure that we don't stand there in front of that throne with a whole pile of judgments that we have made on other people to answer for. There is only one just judge, and that is Christ our Lord. Let's entrust ourselves to his mercy, to treat one another with compassion, recognizing that each and every single one of us are a person with a story, with our high moments and our best moments and our worst moments. And let's commend one another to the love and mercy of God.